As a young bush pilot, he risked his life.
The adrenaline ran, let me tell you. There were many times you were scared.
As founder of Ward Air, he risked everything he had, all for the thrill of flight. Good evening, I'm Gordon Pinsent. As a boy, Max Ward built model airplanes like this. And if they weren't absolutely perfect, he'd throw them away and start again. When he grew up, he would build an airline the same way. He turned his boyhood fascination with flight into Ward Air, a multi-million-dollar airline renowned for its first-class service. But Max Ward's flight to the top was a hair-raising ride. He endured physical hardship, crippling debts, battled with bureaucracy, and as a bush pilot, he walked away from 4 plane crashes. Tonight, fly with the last of the legendary pilots, a man who risked it all.
The Royal Canadian Air Force taught Max Ward how to fly.
Contact! Contact!
But that very first spin in a Tiger Moth was no fun at all.
We did loops and rolls and you name it, and I was sick as a dog. I was ready to jump out of that darn airplane. I always remember that. Whenever I flew, I was sick for for quite a while. And I just stayed with it till I got over it.
Max Ward of Edmonton is the kind of guy who would stick with it. One of the last of the legendary Canadian bush pilots who flew from primitive single-engine biplanes into the jet age. He paid just over $10,000 for his first plane, more than $100 million for his last, living on the edge his entire career.
For many years, I had personally signed banknotes. So if the company went under, I failed, I was really completely out. I was a gone goose.
Great. There.
Okay.
That's great.
For years and years, Max Ward flew in dangerous weather, without a map. He walked away from 4 plane crashes, insisting all the while that his risks were calculated. Against the odds, he created a first-class international airline from a pocket full of dust and passion.
He is a builder, and if you're going to build something, you're going to build it well, and you're going to build it right, and he just had the character to do that. He's a perfectionist. I love airplanes, but I think the float planes are the prettiest. They're just gorgeous. There's nothing so nice as this. It's an old story going north. Many, many years.
Cooking Lake, just east of Edmonton, is where it all began. Point of departure for the bush planes that opened Canada's north. How Max and Marjorie Ward got from here to there and back is the stuff of folklore. Maxwell William Ward was born November 22, 1921 in Edmonton. A happy child, but not a spectacular student, he basically got by in school. According to his older sister Lillian, Max was rather independent.
Spoiled. Completely spoiled. I can remember one time when, I guess he was about 8 years old, and I don't know whether he had had a spanking for something. Anytime Dad came after him, he ran, so he probably never did get a spanking, but he knew he was in trouble. So he wrote Mother a note, and he said, "Dear Mom, I've gone west. Don't look for me. Your son, Max Ward." Well, of course, Mother found him in the neighbor's garage not too long after that, but he was completely independent. You couldn't touch him.
Max's father was a ticket agent for the railway, Canadian National. Together, they used to take car engines apart in the front yard. But the mechanical thing Max loved most had struts and wings and a wooden prop. During the Depression, a series of mining booms lured dreamers and drifters to Canada's north. Bush pilots hauled prospectors and their freight hundreds of miles into the wilderness to places with no roads, no rails, no other way to get there.
The most exciting thing that happened in Edmonton were the bush pilots. Any red-blooded boy living in Edmonton wanted to be a bush pilot and wanted to fly.
But like all red-blooded boys, he soon had other interests as well. Brash and decisive at 17, Max Ward met Marjorie Skelton, and it was love at first sight.
I first saw Marjorie at a dance in the Masonic Temple basement in Edmonton. She had a little Scottish outfit on, red plaid, and was a little skinny thing, I might add. And I had a friend along, and I said to the friend, "There's a girl I'm going to marry." And I don't know why I said it just like that, but I did.
But he did ask me to marry him the first date. Did he tell you that? I was a little astonished, but it was nice.
And you said?
No.
I did not. I don't remember what I said,
Yeah, but
actually,
you
but
got
it
out of
wasn't
it
no.
anyway,
It
obviously.
wasn't no.
Then, as romance blossomed, Canada went to war, and Max went away.
From every part of Canada they come, young men enlisting in a fighting force where only youth can serve.
The Royal Canadian Air Force launched his career in aviation. Max was in love with airplanes and with Marjorie Skelton. The courtship continued sporadically as Max was posted to Eastern Canada, where he graduated from pilot training and then, instead of going overseas, was assigned a job as a flight instructor. On June 28, 1944, Max and Marjorie got married. Soon after the war ended, Marjorie and their first child, a daughter named Gay, settled into a basement apartment on the south side of Edmonton, while Max went north to chase his dream of a job flying bush planes. But as soon as he got to Yellowknife, it was obvious to Max that he didn't really want a job. He wanted his own plane and his own company. And so, with savings from the war and a hefty bank loan, he had the down payment for a brand new de Havilland Fox Moth, $10,500 with wheels, skis, and floats. On his way home from the factory in Toronto, he took one of those calculated risks, flying too many hours against a setting sun to a gravel airstrip with no lights.
And I landed after dark, and I centered it right on the middle of the runway, and did everything just right, I thought, and crunch. They had been working on the runway and had piled all the gravel up in the center of the runway, and the place that I landed was right where they had piled this thing. But it was my stupidity, it was my fault.
So Max Ward crashed his brand new baby on day one. What a way to start a career.
Oh, God, I thought I was going to die. I'll never forget that, I'll tell you.
But the mighty Moth was patched up and in 1946 became the workhorse of Max's first company, Polaris Charters of Yellowknife. He was jack of all trades, Pilot, mechanic, dispatcher, freight loader, you name it. To appreciate how dangerous it used to be, consider what it's like now. Flying this far north, this close to the magnetic North Pole, makes a compass unreliable. So modern bush planes cross thousands of miles of frozen lakes, jagged rock, and scrub timber, usually without getting lost, because a computer up front sucks down a signal from a satellite and calculates the exact location, accurate to within 200 feet anywhere on the face of the earth. In Max's early days, there were no satellites, no radios, not even any maps. He flew without a safety net and loved every minute of it.
And I can remember peeking over the side of the old Moth, looking at all the frost and cold, and the trees were covered with hoarfrost, and thinking, ay, 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 if I go down there, what am I going to do? But then you get forced down a couple of times, and you put the old cover on the engine, make a cup of tea, and you sit and you say, hey, this isn't so bad. And then you got used to it, and then you overnighted a few times and found out how to cope, and your confidence began to build up after that.
But staying alive as a bush pilot would be only one of Max's many challenges. In the Air Force, he'd learned that military discipline ran against the grain of his personality. Up north, he learned that government bureaucrats had the same jaw-clenching effect. One morning in the spring of '47, two city slickers from the Air Transport Board paid Max a surprise visit.
And they said, well, you're supposed to have a license. You realize that? And I said, yes, I guess I am. Now, how do I get one of those? Well, that was my response. Well, you can apply for it. Okay, I'll get an application in, I said, as I loaded the airplane, and away I went. And that was the start. So I had an awful time after that with bureaucracy.
Ottawa turned down his application for a commercial license, forcing Max into partnership with another company that did have a license. But partnership, like having a job, was not Max's style, and the arrangement would soon fall apart. All this time, Max had been working alone, away from his wife and child for months on end, camping in hotels and tiny shacks along Back Bay on Great Slave Lake. In August 1947, Marjorie and Gay joined Max in Yellowknife. In the summer of '48, a second daughter, Blythe, was born, and together they adapted to life on the northern frontier.
It was very, very cold. The heat never got to the floor. It was always higher up in the room, so that if you washed the floor, the water froze on the floor. And I used to keep the children in warm clothes most of the time because, of course, they were on the floor all the time, and it was quite chilly.
Their best friends in Yellowknife were Janet and Darrell Hayes and John and Helen Parker, and they all went through the Shacktown follies together.
I can remember when they put the power lines through on our street. So you had to build bonfires to melt the permafrost for the poles to be set. So I don't remember when Marge got her power, but it was quite exciting to use all these wedding presents that were electricity oriented that you'd not been able to use for years.
Eventually, there would be 4 children. In a series of rented houses along Yellowknife's busy waterfront, sons Kim and Blake kept Marjorie very busy while Max continued to work day and night.
She'd support Max through thick and thin, and she knew it was important that he be away. And I don't really remember her ever saying, well, you know, look at him, he's gone again, or something like that.
We didn't get away with anything, no, because my mom was pretty much on top of all of us. But I think she filled in when he wasn't there. She really was the catalyst to the family, and I don't think any of us really felt that we were being raised by a single parent.
He was very often absent. Even if he was staying overnight at the house, he'd be gone first thing in the morning and then be back late at night. And
I was well taken care of as a child, so it didn't, I don't remember being anxious about it. But I didn't expect my father to be there to take me to baseball.
I don't remember him always being away because he was there through my mother. My mother was a wonderful family person. When situations became tough or we were in a crisis, my dad was there. Amazingly enough, he just showed up.
The only way that I could conduct my life in the world of commerce was having a partner that could, in fact, look after the rest of my life, look after the family, and be there for the family. I always knew that I had nothing to worry about with the children and with the home. It was secure and happy and very well looked after.
In January 1949, disaster struck. Max's Moth went missing. The pilot, Grant Ford, and 2 passengers were killed in a crash that destroyed the plane. It was the latest in a series of disasters. The previous winter, their house had burned down. By the fall of '49, Max was deeply in debt, at odds with his business partner, and very discouraged. So he and Marjorie packed it in, moved south to Lethbridge near her parents, and built houses for a living, but not for long.
I would be shingling a roof in the Lethbridge, and I'd look over, and way over there, and those beautiful mountain tops were, with the snow on, were just on the horizon. And
He needed to fly in the north. He loved the north, and he loved the people up there. And he needed to be up there.
Back up north again in 1951, and back in the air, Max flew long hours and pushed the envelope, as always, taking calculated risks.
the adrenaline ran, let me tell you. There were many times you were scared. Don't ever kid yourself. And there were many times where you'd go for hours and you were lost, but you were holding your course and the only thing you had is to hold your line and keep in the right direction.
Then one day, he pushed too far again. Low on fuel, lost, at sunset, in ice fog, near the Arctic Ocean, he clipped the top of a hill and crashed. No one seriously hurt, but nobody knew where they were either, and it took 5 frigid days for search planes to rescue them.
I think you learn to live with a bit of a gnawing anxiety. It's always there. It's you don't talk about it and you don't tell him about it at all, but it's always there. You're conscious of it. It was nice when he was on the ground.
Remember, those were days when the airplanes didn't go as fast, and they bounced a little better off the rocks, and it was part of the game in a way.
When anybody else would have given up the game, Max was more determined than ever to keep flying, and he still wanted his own company. So once again, he applied for a commercial license, and in the spring of 1953, borrowed money for the down payment on a brand new de Havilland Single Otter.
That was the beginning of Ward Air. That was the first single-engine Otter that Max was able to buy. It was the 5th Otter off the line in de Havilland. It was the first one in commercial use in Canada.
After a year waltzing with bureaucrats, Max got his license and flew home to Cooking Lake with the most expensive new bush plane in the business.
It was the last of the hand-built machines, and an excellent machine. And it was very significant to the development of the Arctic in the north, because you could put a 4x8 sheet of plywood in it, you could put in 16-foot lumber, you could get into and out of lakes that heretofore were unheard of as far as bush flying was concerned.
And Max always said you could tell whether it was pre-Otter or post-Otter by the buildings that around the country, that these big sheets of plywood that he could fly in with.
Competitors laid bets that Max would fail. Nobody could buy a $100,000 plane and make a profit in the bush, but he did, and soon had 2, then 3, and eventually 5 Single Otters, and Ward Air became the dominant company in the north.
Breaking all the rules when Life and Times returns.
You expect to drive your Toyota for a long time. But servicing is key. Some mechanics know a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing. Only Toyota Quality Service guarantees the work is done right by the time promised at the price quoted. They've even put their name on it. Just look for this Quality Service pledge only at your Toyota retailer.
Toyota Quality Service, the one to trust.
One Dimetapp Extend tab relieves runny nose and nasal congestion for 12 hours. Oh, and you never know when you'll want long-lasting cold symptom relief.
Doctor recommended Dimetapp Extend tabs. Give yourself some breathing space.
You can't have good health without a good diet.
That's why Centrum is so important to me when my diet isn't right.
Complete vitamin and mineral support. That's what you get with Centrum.
Oh, I feel better just knowing I take it.
Centrum makes a science of being complete.
Got a dirty, filmy shower door? You've got a choice. You can try to scrub it, or you can CLR it. And that rust-stained bathtub? You can try steel wool, or you can CLR it. If you want fast and easy cleaning, try CLR. It's guaranteed to instantly remove the toughest stains caused by calcium, lime, and rust. CLR glass decanters, quick and clean. CLR your pots and pans. CLR those water spot stains, and your toilet too. CLR the stucco wall. Run a little through an empty washer cycle and get rid of rust stains in your machine. CLR works all over the house. It's guaranteed or your money back. So for tough stains in kitchens, bathrooms, basements, and more, the choice is CLR.
Available at participating Canadian Tire, Home Hardware, Kmart, Safeway, Zellers, Pro Hardware, Do-It Centers, True Value Hardware, Beaver Lumber, Co-op stores.
Every year during spring breakup, Northern Bush pilots play a game on the ice, and it's not hockey. It's a game of nerves, deciding when to switch from skis to floats. That time between rotting ice and open water can be a real adventure. One day, Max Ward invited his buddy Darrell Hayes to come along for a ride.
Going along, I was watching out the window, and all these lakes were flying over, and none of them have any ice. So we're on skis. We know we can get from Great Slave Lake to Great Bear Lake, and we'll be all right, but we have no alternate to get down anywhere. And his reply was, and that, old friend, is the reason you and I are taking this flight, because none of the other pilots would touch it. And then he threw his head back and laughed and laughed and laughed. I've never forgotten that. It was a great trip. It all went well.
Taking calculated risks, flying long hours in the land of the midnight sun, was routine at Ward Air. But people who worked for Max say he never asked them to work longer or harder than he did. It's just that Max set such a blistering pace.
There were a lot of good days, but there was also some pretty rough times, especially up north, working in the cold. We never had a hangar. All our maintenance was done outside, and it was pretty hard. And there were a lot of times when you felt like, well, I'm just going to pack it in. I had enough of this, you know. And you talk to Max for 5 minutes, and you'd be all gung-ho, ready to go again. And that still works today.
By the early 1960s, Restless Max, the builder, needed a new project. He'd bought bigger planes and expanded as far as he could in the north. And even though he was making a profit, his ambition had outgrown the entire Northwest Territories. So with a rented DC-6 airplane, he basically invented the holiday charter airline business in Canada. He'd noticed European airlines flying plane loads of tourists to Canada, so why not the other way around? He went looking for clubs, groups of people, and convinced them to hire his plane and fly across the ocean. His first big success came with British war brides who'd married Canadian soldiers at the end of the war and moved to Canada.
Well, that was our whole market. The war brides were the ones that, of course, had been over in Canada since the war in the mid-40s till the 60s, and they all wanted to go home and visit England, and they wanted to go and see their relatives.
What Ward Air offered was the first reasonably cheap way to cross the Atlantic for people who couldn't afford the cost of an ocean liner or a full-fare airline ticket. But the instant popularity of the idea put Ward Air on a collision course with the Government of Canada. In 1937, Trans-Canada Airlines was created by the federal government on the assumption that only the government could afford the cost and the risk of setting up transcontinental air service. To give TCA a chance to get off the ground, federal laws decreed there would be no competition. Eventually, other airlines were allowed to fly the lucrative big city routes, but only on a limited basis. The rules designed to protect TCA were written in stone on Parliament Hill. Even after TCA grew up and became Air Canada, competition was restricted.
Certainly, when I joined the airline, in 1949, 1950, we felt that we had a God-given right to run commercial aviation in this country, and everybody else were poachers, and that existed. I don't think there's any doubt about that. That existed through the 50s and into the 60s.
All the prime routes, international routes, had already been given to Air Canada, the prime locations in all the terminals, really all the goodies. So both CP Air and the regional carriers and Max Ward had a constant battle to try and make inroads on this very close arrangement that the government had at that time with their Crown Corporation.
But Max went ahead anyway with his rented DC-6 and launched the charter holiday business. Keep in mind, these were slow, lumbering old planes that took a long time to fly the ocean. So Max insisted that each crossing would become a house party for the passengers and a marathon for the crew.
Under the G49. Well, we played bingo for one thing because that was a very favorite game. There'd be people with a guitar on board or ukulele, and they'd play their instrument, and the pilots would ring back and say, "What's going on? We can't keep this airplane level." Well, everybody was in the back dancing or whatever.
And they used to work 21 hours on those flights overseas, so that was an endurance test. But the staff all that came with us all realized what the type of operation it was and enjoyed it, despite the fact it was hard work.
Mr. Ward got to know us all as a family, for one thing. I mean, he knew my husband, he knew all the pilots' wives, the engineers' wives. We were a family.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In 5 minutes, we shall be landing at Kastrup Airport.
21 hours over, quick turnaround in Europe, 21 hours back to Canada. They ran that old 4-engine relic around the clock.
Going over to England, for instance, some of the ground crew there from other airlines would say, "Well, how many airplanes do you have?" And we'd say, "One." "How can that be? You're in here every second day, and it takes you practically a day to get there." "Well, that's us, you know."
Over time, it had become obvious that the elderly, piston-driven DC-6 was too slow and too small to make money. So once again, Max gambled. In April 1966, he went down to Seattle and out on a limb to lease a brand new Boeing 727 jet, the first Boeing jet to fly in Canada. With a 727 and a DC-6, Ward Air started making money and political enemies. It turns out that Ward Air had bent the rules that were designed to protect Air Canada, and the rule they bent until it broke was something called the Affinity Charter Rule.
We could not sell tickets, we could not sell to individuals, we could not sell anything except to groups, an organization that take the whole capacity of that airplane. So we formed our own clubs, like everyone else. And I can always remember the Calgary Judo Club. And there was a picture of that, and the front row were about 8 or 9 old ladies sitting in wheelchairs and old men sitting in wheelchairs. And this is the judo club. You know, it was all a laugh, just a laugh.
Right or wrong, once rules are set up, they should be applied. And Max was there to break the rules. Max was there to break the rules. And we were there to some extent, I guess, to defend them.
According to the Affinity Charter rules, you had to be a member of a club for at least 6 months before you qualified to take a charter. In March 1968, what Wardair got caught doing was backdating the memberships.
Air Canada sent their security people to book, and they had us cold. They grounded us. Had an Air Transport Board hearing, and they said, show cause why your license shouldn't be canceled. And it was canceled. I really thought for a while we were cooked at this point.
But the grounding of Wardair blew up in the government's face. The flying public raised a stink with politicians. The charter rules didn't change, but the license was reinstated. Wardair took off again, and Max bought more airplanes. From the old Fox Moth all the way through 707s, 747s, and DC-10s, Max had come a long way. One Christmas, Wardair had a peak load of 17 jumbo jet flights per week to Hawaii. And each time he expanded, the experts predicted his demise. But by the mid-1970s, Wardair had become the largest air charter company in Canada.
Wardair hit some turbulence when Life and Times returns.
Every summer in Yellowknife, at the same old gravel dock on Back Bay, Wardair's birthplace and base of operations for years, there's a gathering of the clan. Theoretically retired, Max spends hours in the cockpit, shuttling sons, daughters, grandchildren, and friends to a family lodge near the Arctic Circle.
Is this Yellowknife?
This is Yellowknife.
Yeah.
You got the right spot.
Hi, kids.
How
Nice
are
to
you?
see you. Good. Hi.
The lodge and the nifty private plane are perks of a successful escape from the airline business. But they very nearly lost it all. For all the years Max flew for a living, he and his family were personally on the hook, forever floating huge bank loans, hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. Son Kim was in marketing. His younger brother Blake ran the Paris operation. Their sister Gay was a flight attendant and later in-flight manager, and they all were on the brink most of their working lives.
I always lived on the edge of my seat in Wardair. We always were this far away from disaster because we always had the foot right on the throttle. And after a while, you kind of think, wow, you know, maybe if I could do it, but not be quite so close to the precipice, it would be more fun.
We had more enemies in Ottawa than friends, and Ottawa ruled. That's when I became aware of the risks.
Constant pressure from Max to keep building. The $100 million gambles on bigger and better airplanes pushed the stakes higher and higher. The nonstop service that made Wardair stand out, the steaks and wine and fine china, was not cheap. Max wanted it first class all the way.
As the airline got bigger, Dad used to spend a lot of time on flights. He'd go on a flight just to see what his passengers were seeing. And I remember it used to be kind of controversial in the head office because people would say, hey, listen, like, we got all these problems. We need you here to help us right now. He'd be saying, no, I got to go to London because I've been getting complaints on that run.
For instance, I noticed that one of the 16 labs on the aircraft was unserviceable.
If he turned on his overhead light and it didn't shine down where the person was reading, he snagged it. Any kind of problem he would snag.
My list here is about 18 or 19 items, and when I get to the office tomorrow morning, I will write the items up.
He would not be out of the airport when he would have phoned back to Toronto or to Edmonton or wherever and said, okay, here's the things wrong with this airplane that I've seen. Bing, 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 bing.
Once, when a Wardair jet was out of service for repairs, Kim Ward rented a replacement, an older jet with chock-a-block seating and minimal service.
This Aero Airlines was something different. And then Aero Airlines had a 2-hour delay, and my people sat in the lounge for 2 hours. And so they got down to San Juan, had their holiday, came back, and Dad's phone started ringing, and letters started coming in. So Dad called me into the office and said, well, what have you done? You know, tell me about this. And I explained what it is and what I had done to communicate with travel agents. And he said, okay, well, give everybody their money back. I said, Dad, there's this is $60,000, $70,000 I have to give, and what about the hotel? And gee, they got a whole vacation, it's a 2-hour delay, and no. So I had to give every penny back, $60,000.
Well, that wasn't Ward Air Service. So we just gave them our money back, which they deserved to get. And we used to spend $300,000 or $400,000 a year giving their money back.
So after that, I was much more careful about playing with his passengers, taking any chances.
That the evidence you're about to give at this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Would you please state your full name?
Although Ward Air was doing well as a charter company, Max imagined and wanted to build an even bigger airline. He wanted a chance to compete against Air Canada and CP Air on the lucrative scheduled runs.
Mr. Chairman, Ward Air has provided the Canadian public with good, sound transportation for 31 years. Why have we been denied access to the whole of the air transportation market?
The big scheduled carriers saw Max as encroaching on their turf, and they worried about Ward Air's deluxe service stealing their passengers.
No question, Max had the reputation in this country and overseas for service far and above ourselves and Air Canada by all our surveys. So no question who was on top.
But soon, Ward Air had worries of its own. Like any company that grows to a certain size, that rah-rah team spirit began to fade. With bigger jets and more passengers to serve, the workload increased. And yet, Max Ward's first-class crews were getting paid less than crews at other major airlines.
I could see their point. The only catch is they could see it from their point of view, but from our point of view, we weren't achieving the same revenues.
For 3 months in 1981, the little airline that could was on strike and locked out. Ward Air hired replacement workers and implied the strikers might not get their jobs back. Workers who had bought Max's dream wholeheartedly felt betrayed by the hardball tactics. The family felt betrayed by the union. Perhaps it was too much to expect that workers who don't own the company would share the dream forever.
It is too much to expect in retrospect. I mean, in a large company, not everybody does share that same vision. For us, it wasn't just a job. For us, it was a life. It was our whole lives.
After the strike, flight crews did get their jobs back with a small pay increase, and they tried to put a happy face on it. But the company got longer work days, shorter rest times, and a service manager to supervise every flight. Loyalty and trust were casualties of the conflict. By the mid-1980s, airline deregulation finally allowed Max to compete on the scheduled runs he'd lobbied so hard to get. But the new jets he needed cost so much money, the debt load pushed Ward Air to the brink of bankruptcy. Max needed a huge injection of cash or somebody to buy his company.
Max and I met in every hotel room in Toronto you can imagine, and on one occasion I said to him, now, Max, we're going nowhere. What are you looking at for your airline? And he said, this is when his shares were around $8. He said, $25. And I said, good God, Max, the $25 you can have Canadian. He said, well, I might just do that. And I said, well, Max, you go and see if you can.
For Air Canada and Canadian, the loss of passengers to Ward Air's deluxe service and low airfares was costing each of them $50 to $75 million a year. a serious threat to their own survival. And then there was the rumor of a political bailout.
In order to save Max Ward, there'd probably be an attempt made to give him a key route. I was worried, along with others who were close to it, it might be Vancouver-Tokyo. If that had been the case, that was our key route, that was the underpinning of the whole airline, and that would have cost us huge dollars, probably in the neighborhood of $50 million a year if that had been given away.
So Rhys Eaton was worried about Ward Air's effect on his bottom line, and Max was losing money. Some say as much as $500,000 a day. In January 1989, Max reluctantly agreed to sell. Canadian paid $17.25 a share, $249 million. The Ward family walked away with roughly $70 million. Max blamed politics and bureaucrats for the death of Ward Air. He says deregulation came 10 years too late to save his dream.
But I was tired too, pretty tired then. And I wasn't quite the chicken I had beat as the years had piled up. So reluctantly, poor old Marjorie cried and cried and cried.
It was very sad. I think maybe he shed a few himself, but he knew it had to be done. It was the right move.
When you're really, your life is, ever since you were first born, there was a Ward Air. It was hard. It was hard on my wife and family. My son came home and said, "Well, is my name still going to be Ward?" That just took me by surprise.
Oh, look, there's a little boat going under the bridge.
It appears Max and Marjorie escaped to retirement just in time. A recession hit, people stopped traveling, and 18 months later, the dollar value of their airplanes dropped. If Max had waited much longer to sell, he could have lost everything.
Any landing you walk away from is a good landing. And I just hope that he can continue walking away from his landings. But there's a lot of risk in anything you do. Especially if you're going to live life and you're going to get somewhere, you're going to take some risks.
The flight of his dreams when Life and Times returns.
Like a lover's first kiss, a pilot's first flight is unforgettable. For Max Ward, the affair began in the front seat of a de Havilland Tiger Moth almost 60 years ago.
When you fly an aircraft, in my bush days in particular, and you go through various experiences with an aircraft, pretty soon that aircraft becomes part of you. It becomes a friend. You'd sort of pat it as you left it because it was your friend, and it becomes alive. So I think that any pilot that flies a particular airplane, after a while, gets to the point where they love it. They love that particular airplane. Then they get another one, and then they love that airplane once they get to know it.
When Max retired, he made one more dream come true. He'd always wanted to fly a jet. And so at age 71, he bought one and did it.
I bought all these wonderful flying machines, 747s and DC-10s and 707s and 727s and Airbuses, and I never got the opportunity to fly them. And I love airplanes and I love the technology. And so I had an idea in the back of my mind that I'd like to fly a jet. I think most old bush pilots would like to do that. The yaw damper is engaged, trims are set, ADG unit checked. Good. Okay, ready to taxi.
He always does this in his life. He does whatever he wants, wants to do, and then he figures out how to do it. So this was another thing. He bought this jet, and then he realized, holy schmoly, this is going to be a lot of work.
80 knots.
Hi, yo.
Yo. V1. And rotate.
Gear up.
Positive brake. Gear coming up.
I bought the airplane before I took the course. because I knew it was going to be tough, but I didn't know it was going to be that tough.
Just level on manual.
There we are. Whoops.
Autopilot, altitude.
Yeah, you handle the throttles there for a minute until I
Okay,
get...
and you're clear right whenever you're ready.
The actual sense of flying is the freedom, and I think that's why Father likes it so much. Is it's the freedom. He's almost unbound. It's the weight is off. The anchors have been released. He's out there.
He has been told he's the oldest jet pilot in Canada. He was a little sad to hear there wasn't somebody older than he was. But that's quite a compliment, I think.
From Yellowknife, 2 hours north by Twin Otter, where the tree line fades just below the Arctic Circle, and the nearest neighbor is 90 miles away, there's a family lodge called Rock Haven, where Max Ward can finally relax.
It's a side of him that I never saw until he retired. And it's wonderful to see him having so much fun. Just loves every day. And every day's a challenge. And he doesn't stop learning. It's just amazing the tasks he takes on.
He didn't beat them, and he knew he didn't win. So I don't think that he would consider himself totally a success at business, no.
What a doll.
I think that perhaps his greatest achievement in his eyes would be the strength of the family unit. The fact that we're all together. We've got an enormous amount of ability to do things by the fact that we stay together, we stick together. And one of the things that I remember most clearly is my mother saying to me that she would back me, even if I was wrong. And that gives you a great deal of strength, gives you a great deal of ability to go out and risk if you know that somebody will pick you up and dust you off, throw you back in.
Well, I suppose it was also because we respected each other, besides loving each other. He built a lot of things with his heart. So that was pretty easy to put up with.
Well, that's our show for tonight.
4 years ago, Rob Beauchamp had a secure job with the Royal Bank. Today, he's a bush pilot, living out a boyhood fantasy in a World War II aircraft.
Flying an aircraft, it's like being a solo violinist at Carnegie Hall. You've got to do your thing right then and there, and you've got to do it right. And the degree to which you do it, either right or wrong, is very, very critical. There's a sense of satisfaction there that's a lot greater than having made a $200,000 or $300,000 loan, or, you know, like when I worked in the bank.
Since Marco Polo went east looking for spices to kill the taste of his meat, Europeans have been obsessed with reaching outward. In the process, we have created mythical heroes. In our own time, the myth has settled on the bush pilot. More than just an airplane driver, the bush pilot is history itself, pushing the frontier north. But on a blustery day on the northern shores of Lake Winnipeg, history seems a long way away.
Looks like we're going to get awfully wet if we don't get out of here very shortly. We're going to get very wet. Yes, sir. Want to get in the Norseman now?
What for? What for?
You don't want to get wet.
You gonna take us for a ride?
Sure, where do you want to go?
At the southern end of Lake Winnipeg, where farmland ends and bush begins, sits Northway Aviation, home base for Rob Beauchamp and the airplanes he flies. Northway Aviation began 25 years ago, when a trapper and fisherman named Geary Johnson decided that flying over the bush was better than walking through it. His son, Jim, brought up in the world of bush flying, does not share Rob Beauchamp's romantic view of the bush pilot's job.
Up to a large degree, he's either a taxi driver or a bus driver. If you're a charter pilot, you're a taxi driver. If you're a scheduled pilot, you're a bus driver. It's as simple as that.
He's about to answer up.
To early aviators flying north after World War I, the North looked much as it had when the first Europeans arrived 3 centuries earlier. In 1690, Henry Kelsey took canoes up the Hayes River. In 1920, the canoe was still the universal mode of summertime transportation. The North was a crucible, hard and treacherous, larger than life. It was also full to the brim with wealth, and as sure as there was gold in the ground, there would be men coming north to dig it out. Of course, the dirty work was seldom done by those who got rich. Harry Geimer has been a prospector since he first came north in 1928, in the days before diamond drills and motorboats, when one site was a whole summer's work, and the tools were a pick, a shovel, a wheelbarrow, and even a blacksmith's forge.
They'd have to pack all that stuff in from the paw, all the way up the Saskatchewan River and past Cumberland House, which is one of the oldest fur trading posts in the country. And they'd pack that all in here by hand. And they did an awful lot of work. And then, like when I can remember when I first went out in the bush up on the Churchill River, it was, all they give me was a tent, and that was it. Never had any toilet paper. Never, even, the old timers would laugh at you if you took a magazine along and used it. They used to use grass or something like that. And then after they started getting the airplane, well, you didn't have to pack all that stuff, and then you started living better.
The airplane was ideally suited to life in the bush. Every lake or patch of snow was a landing strip. Impossible muskeg became so much scenery. Northern concepts of speed and distance were transformed.
I'll never forget my first airplane ride from Schiss Lake going up to Churchill River. And Cap Stevenson, he was the pilot. They named the Winnipeg Flying Field later on after him. We're flying along. We're going, I don't know, about 75, 80 miles an hour, but I thought, boy, that was going something. And the window was open a little bit. I figured if I put my finger out there, I was going so fast it whipped my finger off. So, but
young, I figured I'd take a chance. I put my finger out, nothing happened. Put my whole finger out, nothing. Put my hand out, nothing. Pretty soon I was flying along with my whole arm waving up and down, and then I looked down and I started hollering at the pilot, "Hey, look at the duck down there." Just then the duck got out of the water and shook his body, and horns on it about 4 feet across. Oh, there was a moose, yeah.
If I could go back 40 or 50 years and start flying then, that would be just great. That'd be ducky for me. I'd really like to go back. I'm displaced. I'm in the wrong time. I think that in those days it was so much better to be a pilot because it was a pioneering thing. You were doing something that was totally new and you were learning while you done it.
I admire a lot of the old guys. More than anything, I just admire them for the ability to operate in the severe cold in the wintertime. To operate in 40, 50 below with a jump that they were flying.
Well, I don't think the bush pilot of today has anywhere near the problems that the ones that came before us had. For instance, we've got fairly good radio equipment. We're never more than 15, 20, or maybe half an hour from some form of civilization, at least other people that we can land and communicate with. Let our problems be known if we have any. In the old days, it wasn't quite that simple. You'd take off and be gone maybe for 2 or 3 months. Your base wouldn't know where you are or anything.
Well, with the equipment we had, it was a little rough at times. We had an open cockpit airplane and flew in temperatures as low as 55 below with no heaters or anything else. And the passengers were just about as uncomfortable as we were.
By 1960, Hank Parsons had logged 18,000 hours over the North. It had begun in the Depression, when he and his brother with a second-hand biplane headed north to find work.
The next winter we went up to Savannah Lake with $25 in their pocket and a full tank of gas. Well, we found out it wasn't such an easy way of making a living. It wasn't near the business there that we expected. And the fact that it was a depression, anybody with an airplane would go to any place they thought they could make a few bucks.
The airplane was an idea whose time had come. Harold Farrington made the first commercial flight to the Red Lake goldfields in 1926. By that summer, Red Lake was the busiest airport in the world. In 1928, Punch Dickens reached the Arctic Ocean. He brought the mail, the Edmonton papers, and fresh Florida oranges. Northern isolation was coming to an end, and the men who were ending it were becoming legends just by doing their jobs.
We'd start out in the morning. Well, a typical day would be maybe 5 o'clock in the morning. And we'd have to pick up, go in and pick up some fishermen or a load of fish, or take a diamond drill out. And then we'd come back and there might be an emergency call. A seriously injured person or sick person in one of these Indian reservations or mining camps, and we'd end up there. The next, it might be a report of a forest fire starting. So we never knew when we went to work in the morning what was going to develop during the day. We could be doing 3 or 4 different types of trips.
So where am I going?
You'll be going to Top River.
Yeah.
3 lakes. There's 6 guys and probably 2 canoes.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to make 2 shuttles in between, then back to Black River, and then just come south.
Oh, okay.
That should be the story. And I'll go to Lewis Lake, 3 lakes, and back.
years now since Hank Parsons learned to fly and Punch Dickens first reached the Arctic. But the bush pilot's north is still a frontier, and the frontier is reflected in his equipment and his attitude.
If I'm going to fly, I really enjoy flying, but the milk run type of thing really turns me off, like the Air Canada Pacific Western type of thing. I could never do that. Why not work in the bank? It's the same thing. You wear a white shirt, tie, yes sir, no sir. You know, you're sitting at a desk and autopilot's doing all the flying for you. And when he's not doing the flying, the first officer is, so. I get a lot of satisfaction from what I do.
300 years ago, Scottish fur traders brought the Indians the iron tools that would make their lives easier and would make them forever dependent on the products of Europe. Today, in his weekly visit to the communities around Lake Winnipeg, Rob Beauchamp supplies that dependence. In addition to the fur traders' blankets, guns, and axes, the cargoes of this modern voyageur include lumber, frozen meat, fresh vegetables, civil servants, and disposable diapers. While Rob Beauchamp supplies the communities on the shores of Lake Winnipeg, his boss, Jim Johnson, heads inland toward the remote lakes of eastern Manitoba. His job today is to find scattered native groups harvesting wild rice among these lakes and buy as much of their rice as he can for a dealer in Chicago. This is the bush pilot's traditional role, the go-between, the representative of Southern society who must meet the North on its own terms and persuade it to give up its wealth. Despite their outboard motors, the Saulteaux people of Pungassi gathered the wild rice in much the way they have for centuries. It is here, in this land where roads don't yet go, that the age-old relationship between white trader and native producer still remains. Their ancestors made the decision to trade peacefully with the European, a decision they could never reverse. Today, these are the lucky ones. They still have something the white man wants, and they can still hold out for the highest bidder.
How much a pound is getting for rice now? $2 a pound. That's all? How much you pay for a pound? Lots. How many? 2 1/4. 2 1/4? Yeah. First of all, first one has to fix the bottom and then enough to course. $2 1/4, right? Yeah. Where did you buy? Did you buy someplace already? Talk to them.
In 2 days, Jim Johnson will spend $10,000 on behalf of the dealers in Chicago. To do it, and do it well, he has spent a lifetime learning and adapting to the North and its people. It is a timeless scene, as old as trading itself, one that reflects a high degree of mutual respect and mutual understanding. But more and more, it is a scene that belongs to the past. For today, as always, change in the North revolves around the pursuit of wealth. But in the 20th century, the wealth of the North lies not in its lakes and forests, but under them. "300 miles north of the rice harvest sits Thompson, company town to Inco Metals, rising out of the bush like a suburb without a city. Thompson is the future of the North, a future that began 30 years ago in the mining boom that followed World War II. In the feverish activity of rebuilding for peace, minerals played a key role. Mining stocks soared as eager investors poured money into the search for copper, lead, zinc, nickel, and gold. In the North, salad days for the bush pilots. Prospectors went into the bush by the plane load, and with them, diamond drills, survey crews, gasoline, oil, food, and camp supplies. Often there were not enough planes to do all the work. Jack Lamb and his brother Greg, flying out of the Pas, Manitoba, spent these years supplying camps right across the North.
You'd be gone for 3 or 4 months at a crack, you see. But those are 200, 250-hour months. All you want to do is get that trip over with, get your money, go to the next trip. If the work is there, just keep going with it. Grow, 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 grow.
In 1956, it all paid off. Inco discovered vast deposits of nickel in northern Manitoba. Using all the power of post-war technology and the immense cash reserves of a multinational corporation, Inco set out to build a mining town that would be like no mining town before it. The new city would take the name of John Fairfield Thompson, the mining executive who controlled Inco, from his office on Wall Street. Thompson, a generation later, is a community of 20,000 with no downtown, but with 4 shopping centers where any Southerner can feel at home. Today, the need to adapt to the North, to meet it on its own terms and change with it, no longer exists. In Thompson, the North of the bush pilot, the fur trader, and the Indian has simply been eliminated. And now, there are no new bush planes being produced anywhere in the world. The planes that replace them will require runways. They will carry bigger loads, but they won't land here. Whether we call this progress or simply an obsession with growth depends entirely on our point of view.
So the white man, thinks he's always doing good by putting roads in where roads don't belong. If every place in the world should have a road, they should put a road in the top of Mount Everest for the people who want to climb it so they don't have to work so hard. It's unfortunate that governments don't see this. There are areas that people just shouldn't have a road into so that they can do the things that they want to do. A float plane will never leave a mark in the water, nor will a canoe. All you hear is the sound, you see the ripple in the water, in a few minutes it's all gone.
impression that people get of him is a guy who's got it made, who's really got it made.
He has problems the same as everybody else, except Blake, I think, conceals his.
I think he really likes being alive. If he's depressed, maybe it's because he feels he's not doing enough, you know, like he feels maybe he's wasting his time working. Like people say, what do you do? Well, I just fly around, you know, I need the money, I work. Nobody said that man's got to work. A guy like that, just moving into a scene and out of it, turns on people, you know, like you see him and you say, God, he's free, and I should be like that. The thing is, it's so hard to be free now. Roads are jammed, the stores are jammed, cities are jammed.
Blake hates cities. Blake won't go anywhere near a city unless he has to.
Blake's idea is what you don't spend, you don't have to earn. And that's why he drives these terrible beat-up old cars.
When I first heard about Blake, I heard about him years before I met him. And I said, oh yeah, he sounds like some phony, you know, some kind of nut that sort of lives up in the woods to entice young girls to come up there and stay with him. Because there was a young girl that told me about him. You know. She described this man who lived in the woods, and he was sweet and gentle, very innocent, almost naive, childlike, you know, all these things that you say, oh yeah, sure. Anyway, when I met the guy, I get the feeling that he's a real person.
He can't stand to be tied down. And this is why he gets so mad at himself when he collects all this junk. So what he does now really is he just locks the door and pays his rent in advance and heads out. You know, these cross-country trips can turn out to be anywhere from a day. You know, the engine might pack up first day, or it might hold out for a couple of weeks until he gets as far as Edmonton. The second last cross-country trip he went on, he was away 2 years.
Blake was born in the wrong age, you know. All his heroes are First World War fighter pilots, you know. He's always talking about the First World War, you know, Bishop, Barker, Collishaw, and this is when Blake really comes alive. There's 1,001 drawings that he's got up on his wall of his aeroplane, in British markings, you know, in French markings, and with little crosses all down the fuselage.
numerous experiences he's had are to be caught up after dark because he loses himself and forgets about time.
Yeah, but I don't think he's taken night flying, has he? I don't think he's even qualified to fly at night.
Oh gosh, no. His airplane just isn't equipped for night flying, no navigation or anything like that. No lights, no radio. He's not a daredevil type of fellow, and he's so sincere in thinking he's doing everything so safe. Even his unique methods of navigating, such as following roads, and which is fine until they fork, and then you get problems.
Does he ever use a parachute?
No. He'd never bail out. For him, the idea of leaving his airplane is absolutely unthinkable. He'd put it into the trees or into a lake first.
Roger, you're 30 miles east of the airport. Transpond 04 Alpha and contact Montreal Arrival Control to frequency 119.3.
Don't know, sir. Can't raise it.
Canada
He's just coming in anyway. Must be in trouble.
Canada 316. Let's get someone down there to check him out. 27.6 over Camp intersection.
Come on, get it moving. We're stacking up.
Granby now, what's the altitude?
870, we're just out of 16.5.
All right, Canada 870. Canada 307, you're 3 miles northeast of Roxton. Have you left 12,000 yet?
Canada 307.
Get it up, boy. Get it up, boy.
Jeez. Roger advised needing 8,000 feet.
find him fascinating. The way he dresses and the way he's so different, and not trying to be different, but he just is.
The thing that I think people respond to him in is that you know that he's not going to hurt you. You don't have to be on your guard.
I often envy his this real sense of freedom that he has that we would all like. But what I'm not willing to do is give up what I've got in married life and my children.
I wonder if he ever regrets not getting married, or if he ever will.
I've often wondered why he doesn't, because he's got lots of girlfriends.
Yeah, all of a sudden it was like saying, you should have a steady job. Why should a guy get married,
I remember he had one girlfriend out in Banff. This is a very personal thing, but I think that he was really interested in her. And you know, that girl was nuts about him, and she couldn't bring herself to introduce him to her parents. Because he was such a character, or such an individual, she evidently came from a very staid family, and she couldn't bring herself to do it, to finally, they called it off. I wonder if sometimes he doesn't sit back and wonder where he's going, what he's doing, whether he's getting anywhere.
He's just being what he wants to be. You feel that there's a man that's doing, when he wants to do something, he can do it. It just makes you want to feel that I'm going to get in that position, in my way. He just happens to be freer than most of us.
He talks very curiously about some of the problems he's had with his plane. But it almost sounds as if he was fearless, until the time when he took off on one of his Edmonton trips, and he got in the cockpit, and you could see obviously that there was a fear that I had never seen in Blake before. And then as he took off, you see that plane bounce down the field, and then sort of wobble up. And it's just almost nostalgic to see this fellow going off into the sunset, and almost though we were saying goodbye to him, and we really felt we'd never see him again.